Greetings. Today I am talking about the train spotter, the baseball nerd, the pub quiz champion. Examples of this type with reduced affect display. Former Prime Minister of Britain, John Major. E.L. Wisty, a character created by Peter Cook, based on a real person, of Vladimir Putin, who's been in the news. And now I don't believe you wanted to do that. You don't want to do that like that. You want to do that like this. Very much about procedure and doing things in the proper, authorized way. So we are talking about the contender guardian. MBTI preferences, ISTJ, the contender guardian. SiTx, sit. So I've lined up the graphics. Now this is because this is a concrete type. This is one of these ones where it's a little bit awkward, where the club is not the same as the temperament. The club being ST, and the clubs being discovered by Van der Hoop and then copied by Isabel Briggs. That's her real surname. Right. You could say it's Cook, because that was the surname of her mother. Right. So I'm going to mention clubs. These are some examples of clubs. And this is for ENFP. And actually, this is the dual, the complementary opposite of the sit. So in here, you've got the ST functions of the counter nucleus. So this is when the type is polarized, meaning that the ST functions are fully conscious. So it's a counter club within the field of a counter nucleus within the field of conscious orientation. Now, in reality, most people are going to be polarized. They're going to be aware of their counter club functions to a certain extent. But certainly a lot of IT types, introverting and thinking preference types, are going to have very weak FE. And an FE Dom might say, oh, they're, if they know about typology, they might say, oh, their FE is not really conscious. Anyway, so NF, ST, these are the clubs. And then one for INTP, NT, and SF. So this is 1937. So it was Van der Hoop that came up with the clubs. And he named them Ethos for NF, Logos for NT, Technique ST, and Morality SF. These names, you might say, oh, Ben, you're assuming that ethos refers to that and that, but it doesn't work with any other combinations. And we know idealists have a focus on ethics. Now, this SF morality goes more for the SFJs than the SFPs. Although you get a lot of ESFPs in politics. Right. Khrushchev, ESFP. What else? This is going to be an introvert, so this is one of these types where... But this is where it gets interesting, because... So, ISTJ, the SIT, is an introvert. Myself in the world. But they're also a concrete type. So it's almost like... I'm going to do a little graphic here that I should arguably have done before. But I will sort of make an argument that there are some different degrees of extroversion and introversion, and that there's an overlap between some ideas. And this is what Keirsey would have... Keirsey's argument about the overlap between introverting and intuiting and between extroverting and sensing. There is a partial overlap. What I can say is this: if we do a sort of a spectrum of sort of like a spectrum of abstraction, and we have at one side we have, I will get on to ISTJ, but I'm doing a build-up, where we've got the IN types at one end and then the ES types at the other. So like these are the most empirical because they have a sensory instincting preference and are extroverting. And then the question is, who then is it, IS and then EN, or should it be EN and IS in the middle along that spectrum? Because this is where it gets tricky in the middle. So ISTJ, as one of these IS types, they are, the focus of their function is empirical, but SI is very much the subjective reaction to that objective data. So they are focused on the sensory, but it's their subjective reaction to that. And so you get this with the Guardian. The Guardian is filtering everything through its past experience and how things should be done. The Artisan is going more, especially the SE DOM, is going more what are the actual sensory data and immersing in the present context, to use Dario Nardi's phrase. It's been on the channel 8 times, 7 or 8 times. I lose count. So you could say that someone who immerses in the present context is the most empirical. But when you've got ISTJ, and it's like, where does their subjective factor come in? And what they are looking at. So you could have 10 ISTJs from lots of different cultures, lots of different ages, look at the same set of circumstances, and they've all got different backstories, and they look at the present circumstances, and they'll all have a different opinion. Whereas for the SE DOMs from different cultures, they're all more likely to say, well, it is what it is. Those are the facts that you can see in front. So my postulation would be there will be less difference in opinion amongst the SE DOMs in judging something like some factual sensory data in front of them, because they'll go to the empirical sensory features of the object, whereas all the SI DOMs, they'll be like, oh, that reminds me of this, or this is like that, and they'll connect it to different experiences. There might be, oh, something might be, say, a certain color, and that color might have certain connotations in a certain culture. And all that subjectivity of that past experience will affect the present experience because of all of that SI baggage. So that then brings me on to talk about SI. And when I've talked about SI, I'm then going to talk about, I'm going to get onto verting and subjectivity. So this is in talking about how the SI DOM is empirical and how it is subjective. It's like it's a subjective interpretation of empirical data. They're a sensory instinctual type. But in order to show what that means, if I then go on to Dario's differences, and this is also a lead-in to why Van der Hoek called it sensory instinctum. So if I do this first, so what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to freeze that and read it. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'll just say here, the emotional reactions are immediately bound up with the sensations. Right, and adaptations here governed by emphases in regard to emotion and attention in the field of sensations, and that action is also directed by details of concrete kind. And again, it's habit. The instinct is the habit in the SI DOM. And then here, if you please read that, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And then, so this is 1937. Well, in German, 1937, it was published in English translation by Laura, wasn't chained to a kitchen sink Hutton in 1939. I wonder if she was INTP preferences, or would have been that because it didn't have the preferences then. Right. So we've got Vanderhoop there going on about instinct, and here, look at the artisan instinct. I mean, he's literally put instinct there. And so remember what Vanderhoop put there about the emotional reaction is bound up with the sensation? What's the emotional reaction here with the artisan? Exciting. Now, what's the emotional reaction of the guardian going to be? Oh no, scary. New. Don't like change. Dangerous. Wanting to go towards what works. Oh, not safe. Don't like change. Prefer the familiar. Why? Because it's tried and true. Safety, consistency, stability. And frequently the ISTJ is Enneagram 6 fixated. There's a character in my sitcom who's going to be an ISTJ 6. It's called Terry. And again, action, being in the moment, the thrill of action. So, but the guardian, especially the SI DOM, they're not going to like the thrill of action. They're going to be worried and concerned by that. Again, frequently Enneagram 6 fixated. They want a boring life because to them it's Carmen. And I'll get into that. And then so here, the instinct here. This is not just subjective sensor. It is sensory instinct, and the instinct is the guardian instinct. Dario calls the SI chapter in his latest book, The Magic Diamond, latest typology book, cautious protector for SI. Cautious protector. There's not much about, and also perception is different from sensor. It's not the same thing. Perception is object recognition, facial recognition, distinguishing words from sounds, attention, depth perception cues, motion cues. All of these things is related to perception, and it's a separate area, and it's studied in cognitive psychology. So here, I mean, look at this. Feel inclined to put a stop to something new to your experience. So that's going towards emotion, feeling. This is supposedly just a perceiving function. It's not perceiving, it's an irrational function. Both of these are irrational in that they're not deliberative. Right, so wanting to follow the example of those because it's consistent, what you're accustomed to, what works, what is safe. Focus on security. Trust solutions that have stabilized the situation in the past. In emergencies, trust solutions that have stabilized the situation in the past. Motivation. What is reliable? There. Compare. Here we go. Remember what I said about at the beginning? Compare an experience against a storehouse of familiar experiences to find what's reliable. This is what I was saying. If you've got 10 different ISTJs, different ages from all over the world, their experiences are vastly different. And when they experience, and you bring them all together to experience something, to ask them their opinion on a certain phenomenon, then they're going to have different interpretations because of their different past experiences. Whereas the artisan is going to be more focused on the present experience. So this is a little bit of difference between extroverting and introverting. So now I want to do a little bit more on what are the motivators of the guardian. Because this is how we're doing SI. This is how I'm doing SI. As I'm saying that SI is a distinction of all of this. Because it's sensory instinctum. What is the motivation that's correlated with the process? So we've got guardians like, and it also goes with weak NI as well. This sort of like fatalism. So that's fatalism on looking back on the past. Oh, you couldn't do anything about it. It's like, so they get locked in with weak sort of like NI. You got again stabilizer. Stabilize the situation. NFs want to develop it, and then you've got visionary for the NTs. Right. Trump, art of the deal, negotiator. Everything's up for grabs. Everything's on the table. No-go areas. Now, stoicism, pessimism, fatalism, focus on yesterday. Part of that SI, all that past experience. Benefit of this, guardians usually. I asked Dr. Sabrina recently about the distribution of doctorates. If you're talking about medicine or education, the majority of doctorates are going to be by guardians. It's when you get into more abstract subjects that you get more of the intuitives. So probably the majority of people out there with doctorates are going to be guardians. Because SI helps a lot with discipline and memory. Because part of that is going over the same as very good in medicine. Guardians. In fact, my own GP, ESFJ preferences, I reckon. Again, trust authority, that's part of the instinct, and yearn to belong. Even ISTJ, which is FE polar, FE allergic. But their FE allergic comes through in their reduced affect display. Oh, yes, this is me being excited. I'll have to calm myself down. Gratitude. Again, executive. This is probably more SFJ's gratitude. Yeah. So that's part of the instinct of, and again, orthodox. So what does that mean? Well, that means it's going to vary by culture. Very much affected by their culture. Very external frame of reference, you would say, for NLP terms. So let's get a bit more on ISTJ. And I'll put myself back. So all these different kinds of SI, where you got these, and this is why I came up with subfunctions, inspired by DC&H. I got rid of the normalizing subfunction because I was just repeating assertive. And then I realized, well, the only reason why the normalizing subfunction is in Socionics is so that they can distinguish between artisans and guardians. So anyone who's really a guardian, if you're typing them in Socionics, you type them as a normalizing subtype. So it's a way for them to see guardians, because they don't have the guardian temperament in Socionics. So again here, stabilize the situation. That's your assertive SI. That's your instinct, security. Security seekers. Going with the tried and true, what works. And if anything goes wrong, it's also defensive. Anything goes wrong, oh, I'm not, I followed the instructions, I followed procedure, I didn't do anything wrong. So there's a tendency towards the guardians covering themselves. Now, Also, what I might say is the more educated guardians, it's not just the case of them being by the book. Like with ISTJ, by the flipping library. Like, because they'll have loads of different experts and authorities that they will go to and like pick the one that fits the situation. But they're always looking for that authority, especially if they're an ISTJ 6, because the 6 is looking towards an authority as well. I mean, I look towards an authority, but I question the authority. Right. So there's areas where Vanderhoop, darn it, you didn't get it right. I want you to be right. I want a typologist to look up to who's brilliant. All right. Who's right about everything and super insightful. Right. Again, the imaginative. This is what Jung concentrated on. The imaginative subfunction of SI, which might actually be used more by ISFP than ISFJ, and more by ISTP than ISTJ, because it's not inconsistent with the temperament. A lot of times this is inconsistent with the temperament, because they're going towards the tried and the true and the secure, imaginative, well, risky. And so all of that, a lot of that will get ignored. So this will come through in Guardians. ISTJs reading a novel, brilliant picturing abilities. I've asked quite a few Guardians this. They love description in novels. All that description in the Song of Ice and Fire novels that a lot of people find tiresome, they love that. It's evocative for them. They have that imaginative back of the brain, highly active in Dario's EEG areas. Get neuroscience of personality to know more. And then here, imaginative guardians are frequently uncreative as a profession. So you can see that. And then the comfort sensing. This is more for ISFJ, will sort of go on this. But I imagine, yeah, you might get like an Enneagram 9 ISTJ might do a bit more of this. Again, the assertive, and then the inspector role in enforcing standard operating procedure. I'm gonna get on to more of the SI on the like the pro what Vanderhoop. I went through this profile in the last video, but I sort of focused on the ones here because I've sort of like highlighted it, and I didn't do that last time, and I'm going to go over that. But I've sort of got this out of order, so I want to make sure that I cover the arrangement and where we have. So we've got SI. So we've got these 3 factors in this model: value, default, and club. And actually, the most important factor is, it's like, what is the most important factor in this model? Club. So it's like, if you're in the club function, you're in the top 4 automatically. Then it's valued. And then it's default. Then it's default. So, for example, if we compare slot 2 and slot 3, both of them tick 2 boxes, but slot 2 is higher ranked. So what does that mean? That means that value gets put ahead of Verton. But if someone's really, really introverted, they might be ahead of that. And then also, what does it say here? So value is ahead of Verton. And what else? And club is ahead of valued, like slot 4 before slot 5. Even though slot 5 ticks 2 boxes, that just slits 1. So it's, so in terms of order of preference, it's club versus counter club, valued versus unvalued, and default versus situational. But it's going to vary by certain people. But that's roughly the way the model is arranged. And these clubs, it's backed up by Dario Nardi's data. And I do hope I have it in here. Yes. So that's Dario Nardi banging on about the data. I will let you read that. There you go. We want to pause that because I've got to get a wriggle on because I've really done much so far in this video. I've just been sort of banging on. So what I'm going to talk about here is, so we have an introverting type, and I'm going to bang on about this. But first of all, what I want to do is I want to make sure that all of this gets covered. So I'm going to freeze that. So you can sort of like come back to this later. I'm just going to leave it on screen a bit for it to focus. Then you can sort of read this later on. I'm also going to go across to the other slots. I'm just going to do this because it's just easier to do it this way. Because this is from the graphic, which is more in depth. If I move that down there. Right. I'll try and leave that a while so that it clears. And this is like the really in-depth version. And I go through that in an INTP video. This is a little wrinkle where I'm comparing it to Model G about information and energy. Right, I have a few differences with Model G. Right, but you'd need to be familiar with that if I was sort of like compare the two. So what we have is default operating mode. So, and this is sort of backed up by Dario, that like the introvert is pretty good at all the introverting functions, especially basic use. But NI is going to have a negative cast to it in Istj. They're going to go with what stabilizes the situation rather than what develops the situation. So, but they can see how something can go wrong. Right, so I'm going to, so default operating mode, MO, modus operandi. Right, subjectifying. So this is going on about what exactly introverting is. In case you're on a smaller device. Right. So I'll read through that. SI is not as internal as the other introverting functions. However, certain subfunctions are, e.g. SI imaginative, sensory imagination, SI harmonizing, internal bodily harmony. Default as in defaults to, i.e. prefers. One's experience of default mode is more nuanced and practiced than one's situational mode. For introverting types, the default operating mode, you guessed it, is introverting. One can introvert without an external stimulus, e.g. whilst reflecting. And one can even introvert, i.e. subjectify, an outside stimulus by placing more attention on the subjective reaction to the stimulus rather than the empirical aspects of it, or aspects. And then here am I, subjectifying this. BV subjectifying elaborated on Dario Nardi in 8 Keys of Self-Leadership. Introverts are comfortable doing many introverted activities. So slot 1 best, 3 well, 5 well enough, 7 gets by with development. Again, the reason I put subjectifying is like I've had to compress what Dario wrote in order to fit it in. He just basically wrote something like comfortable doing many introverted activities, especially basic ones. It's like even INTP is not bad at FI. Right. It's like ENTP can be good at SE. ENFP can be good at SE. Right. And then this is, I cleaned up this definition of introverting to make it more understandable. Right. So Interest. This is Jung in Psychological Types, chapter 11. Interest does not move towards the object, but recedes towards the subject. Introverting. Now, when it's not in quotes, it's me. Introverting, i.e. the state of introversion, means the subject, person, has more interest in its subjective experience than in the object or external stimulus. E.g., sound is not an object, but it can hold one's attention outside of oneself. Hopefully you're doing that at the moment. Everyone whose attitude is introverted thinks, feels, and acts in a way that clearly demonstrates that the subject is the chief factor of motivation. So you see that there is consistent with the Dario belief that the introvert is pretty good at all the introverting functions, because Jung has written, everyone whose attitude is introverted thinks, feels, and acts in a way that clearly demonstrates that the subject is the chief factor of motivation. So if you've got an INTP, that means they're going a lot of FI, because that means that their feeling is subjective. Their feeling is introverting. Right. So it's all colored by subjectivity. Clearly demonstrate that the subject is the chief factor of motivation. This is why I'm calling it subjective. That the subject is the chief factor of motivation, while the object, or stimulus such as sound, at most receives only a secondary value. Introversion is active when subject wills a certain seclusion in the face of an object. So think of an extrovert that like has a bit of a crisis and they reflect, something which is not normal. Whereas like INFP would be reflecting on its feelings more than any other type. That and ISFP. Introversion is active when the subject wills it. It is passive when the subject is unable to restore or maintain interest in the object or stimulus, or interest metaphorically. Yeah, because when he talks about there is unable to restore libido and it traveling back and all of this, so I cleaned it up to and maintain interest in the object or stimulus, and interest metaphorically turns away from the object back towards the subject. That's me cleaning it up, because you should see how vague it is in the actual source. When introversion is, because he writes about unable to restore libido to the object. But you see, the thing is, libido is correlated to interest. I mean, that was sort of stated in another book of Jung's, I think his prior book, which actually got retitled later on. It was a book about the unconscious. Yeah, when introversion is habitual, one speaks of the introverted type. And here, telling, because it means actions of and feelings in a TI DOM will often be subjective, introverted. And it also means that the thinking and feelings in an ISTJ will also be subjective as well. And then this is for rational types. It's just keeping separate the laws of logic from TI, which explains why you can have feeling types that have very high logico-mathematical IQs. So you can have an ENFP, an ESFP, an ESFJ, or an ENFJ, types which are counterclub situational TI or one-dimensional TI in Socionics, yet they can have a logical and mathematical IQ which can be very high. So TI is separate from logical and mathematical IQ. It's just that those with high TI tend to rely more on reasoning, and so like practice leads to more development of that. Right, and then we've got the situational row. So we have the situational extroverting in the ISTJ. The preferences towards introverting. Situational operating mode in the introvert is extroverting, i.e. empiricalizing and externalizing. And then here, this is, and then, is that it? I mean, Jung on extroversion. Okay, I'm just going to put it like that. Right. Compared to the personal row in Victor Galenka's Model G, the situational row is less specific. It can include the personal. So the idea in Model G is that an introvert will only extrovert when on its territory, when it's, say, for example, in its comfort zone. So it might be, oh, Ben only extroverts when he is talking about something that he's interested in or with people that he likes. That would be the theory in Model G. That's quite narrow, isn't it? Whereas Vanderhoek gives an example there of an INTP forced to extrovert because he was riding a horse. He had to put his attention outwards on what he was doing because otherwise he would be in danger of being thrown. There. Riveted on the totality of my sense experience and my reactions to it. So he was in a state of SE not because he was on his territory, but because the situation demanded it. Situational. Compared to the personal row in Victor Galenka's Model G, the situational row is less specific. It can include the personal, e.g. the INTP resembles becoming expressive when talking on its territory, e.g. about an interest, or more open with feelings when talking to someone who has a good relationship with. However, situational includes something the personal does not. So you see, situational includes what the personal includes. It's broader. There is a tendency in socionics, this is why it's after socionics. There's a tendency in socionics for it to be too precise. I'm willing to give up precision in order for greater accuracy. Right. So, for example, 6.895898256789544 is a very precise number, but it's not accurate. Whereas a more accurate number might be, 6.3 or whatever. It's like significant figures. What accuracy was it measured to? Because I remember at university them saying, like, don't write down a number with all of those decimal points because you've not measured it to that level of accuracy. What we got here? Don't just put the number down that come out of the calculator. That came out of the calculator. Expressive on its territory. However, situation includes something the personal does not. The idea that certain functions draw on certain faculties, which are of opposite vertum to the type, e.g. situations which draw on the extroverting functions of the introvert. And then here, my views. And then I'll get on to TE. I'm 38 minutes in. In practice, a real person... Actually, I won't get on to TE. I'll go on to the SI DOM profile. In practice, a real person is best described as dynamically alternating between degrees of extroverting and introverting and moving along a avertness spectrum. This can be a moment-by-moment change. Also, a real person resembles rather than is a type. Hence, tin resembler, which is what... And then I'd write it down as TINX. Because otherwise, it looks like TI Normalising. Even though a type resembler can do atypical things, they tend to do it in a typical way. Here we go. Buy the book Istj Artist or Imogen's brother, Istj Artist. They're going to be buy the book in classical. I'm wanting to emulate classical form. Emulate the masters. Again, looking towards an authority. Let's so the first proper description of a guardian is here by Vanderhoek in 1937. I'm going to pause that so that you can sort of see it. But again, like, there's certain deductive thinking that he does, like, it's a bit like habit. It's like, it's tricky. Right, but there are points where he gets it right. Right. This is well put. It depends upon the extent to which he is stirred, whether a given experience will make a big impression on him, not upon the intensity of the sensation itself. Now, for the SE types, they're more about the intensity of the sensation itself, its empirical elements, rather than the connotations. Right, and then here, and now here, monosyllabic reserve. This gets in with the FE polar. The counterclub unvalued situational FE. Again, look what the other one said. They want the familiar. Dario. What's reliable? What worked in the past? Accustomed to. If you're accustomed to something, you're familiar with it. Right here. This a little bit more. People of this type have well developed. So this is just SI DOMs together. People of this type have well developed sense organs, but they are particularly receptive to anything having lasting value for human instinctual needs. This lends to their lives a certain solid comfort sensing, going towards the comfortable, although it may lead to somewhat ponderous caution. What did Dario call that chapter? Cautious protector. If instinct becomes too deeply attached to all kinds of minor details, that is ISTJ to a T. To a T, the inspector of details. Advantages and disadvantages of this type are well brought out in the reserved and conservative farmer. Conservative, with his care, SI for his land and his beast. Tendency to carry on everything down to the smallest detail in the same old way. Same old way. Accustomed to. Customary standard. News. Same old way. Trust solutions that have stabilized the situation in the past. What's reliable? Same old way. In the same old way. The same is true of the sailor. Sailor? I don't know about that. He also shows a passive resistance to anything new. A passive resistance to anything new. Feel inclined to put a stop to something new to your experience. Come on. Van der Hoop nailed it. I mean, the first bit of the... I mean, in... What I can say is in Jung, when he described the SI DOM, he said that they don't want to take risks because of the negative, because of the inferior NE. Seeing like how basically our smelling rats where they don't exist. So that bit went towards the cautiousness of the SI DOM in Jung. But it was like Van der Hoop who was the first to nail it. Minutest detail. That is so ISTJ. Right. And then we have here. Good mastery of the technical side of their calling. Again, if they're STs, rather than if they're ISTJ. Again, yeah, they're going to underestimate rather than overestimate themselves. Weak NI. Difficulty in understanding their own potentialities and worth. Weak intuition in general. Little inclination to activity. They never rarely depart. Never depart from routine. Guardian AF. Facts. And fundamental facts was subject to exact and thorough investigation. The inspector. Facts. Pub quiz champion. Prefer to stick to the familiar and find it difficult to adopt anything new. I mean, he's pretty much written that 2 or 3 times already. Follow those authorities. And then Vermeer. Yes, there's a documentary out there about painting like Vermeer. There is. If you just type in documentary Vermeer, there's a documentary on someone learning how to paint like Vermeer. Introverted, right. Following those authorities, which, by knowledge of the facts, give them the impression of being thorough. Easily upset if the value of their authorities is questioned. Again, guardian. It is a crying shame. I asked David West Keirsey's son, who is David Mark Keirsey, about Van der Hoop and showed him stuff from this book, and he's never heard of it before. It looks like his father, unfortunately, he died in 2013, but unfortunately, well, that was unfortunate, but he was getting on a bit. He was over 90. But here's the issue. He never read conscious orientation. He never referred to conscious orientation. I mean, if you'd have read it, it's quite obvious that I think that Keirsey Sr. would have basically said, Conscious Orientation in many ways is a better book than Psychological Types. It's certainly clearer. And he said he's better on, he would have mentioned it when he criticized Jung. He would have mentioned that Van der Hoek was a more organized and systematic book. Again, no attempt at adaptation is made. Again, sort of opposite of SE. Reminds him of home. Again, that's sort of the SI. Towards the SI. And then here, even in NF matters, they're going to go towards, okay, what does the authority say? This is weird, spooky stuff. What does the authority say? That's the first instinct. Leading spirits on matters. So, here's the thing. Say there is a certain culture in the world. I won't say which one, because, I don't want to get in trouble in issues here. But there might be a culture out there in the world which is very mystical. And your guardians, and that's normal to the guardian. So there might be a particular culture where sort of like witchcraft or mysticism is very much part of the culture. And it's normal to the guardian. And so they're going to go towards the authority. Right. Now, although I remember Jeff saying about guardians in the United States that they like their politicians to mention God, but if they mention it too much or get too specific, the guardians are like, now, hang on a minute, because they get a bit worried because it is a little bit too, because they are concrete types, guardians, and it's like, whoa, that's a little bit too mystical for me. So it's like the guardians like the politicians to pay lip service to religion in the United States. Like, they don't want to get like super duper religious. It's like, whoa. Right, okay, so are we now on TE? We are now on TE. I'm not going to breeze through these in like 5 minutes. So now I can sort of talk a little bit more about these Keirsey roles. Oh, I made a mistake. Oh, yeah, I've made a mistake. What I should have done is highlighted these, but you can mentally do it. Look, TE there and TE there. That should be highlighted. And also, this should be highlighted here. SITE. And, yeah. So, this is the predisposed role, the contending inspector. And the reason why that's the predisposed role is that, so in Keirsey, I constantly bang on about this. This is one of the reasons why Keirsey is misinterpreted, is that people conflate his role variants with his types. His role variants are related to his system of intelligence, these 4 different intellects, as you can see here. Logistical safekeeping, tactical manipulating, diplomatic enabling, and strategic building. And in general, guardians are best at logistics, artisans are best at tactics, idealists are best at diplomacy, NTs are best at strategic building. So, with this contending inspector role, the role is directive. Okay, let's see how you're doing that. Now, not doing it according to procedure, I'm going to mock you down. Or got the inspector missing. You don't want to do it like that. You want to do it like this. So the inspector, that's a contending role, and it's an introverted role. The supervisor role is like, if they're in type 9, you get to work, you artisans. Like, if you watch the series Tanks Born in Russia, you've got Yuri Gatan, and he's like trying to get these artisans to work. And it's like, he comes in a room, sees them all smoking. It's not very good propaganda. It's like, what are you doing? Get to work. And it's like, and he even says at one point, I don't believe in liberal management methods. You need to make them work. So it's like he's very STJ, Yuri Gatan. Anyhow, I've done a video on him on the channel on Yuri Gatan with Haley. So, but the idea there is this role of out of all of the logistical safekeeping roles, so out of the jobs, that ISTJ fits this role. So it's like, this is glove, ISTJ is the hand. And this one fits that because the type is directive and informing. And therefore, the directive and informing role, they don't have to flex to fit that role. Now, to fit the role of supervisor, it's also a directive role, but the ISTJ has to extrovert more in order to like throw their weight around, project themselves, sort of like, you artisans get to work, be a bit more authoritative, because ESTJs have got more authority about them, more in charge, more assertive. Now, for the ISTJ to enact the supplier role, that's more of an informing role, less directive. And it's also an expressive role, because it's like they've got to talk to people more, they've got to get all the products in like that, be a bit more sociable. That's harder. That's the hardest role for them to enact. Now, intellectually, they can do it, but it's just got to do a bit more FE in order to do that role. And then then you've got like the ISTJ role. So you've got like the protector role, sort of like nurse, doctor. It's a reserved role. It's one-on-one, but it's in informing. So the only flex that the ISTJ has to do there is to not be directive, but to be informing. It's a role that requires a bit more FE, a bit more bedside manner, but at least it's a reserved role. It's like asking an ISTJ to do an ESFJ's job. Like, say, a role that the ESFJ would be good in, like, say, host or hostess, master of ceremonies. Difficult for ISTJ to do that, to sort of like go out there, be expressive. The more like go out there and talk like John Major. Oh, hello, everybody. I am so excited that you are here today. And we need to, first of all, we need to go through the procedure of the next meeting. And it's like boring, ISTJ stuff. So it's a bit of a harder flex for ISTJ to act like ESFJ. Right. A role that ESFJ would be good at. Because like ESFJs are good. But that's more in a sort of like a performer role, but ESFJs can also do it. But the actual role of supplier, of getting all the personnel, all of the... Sorry, that was like a different role of like... That's more like a performer role. Here, that one. But ESFJ can also do it because it's got strong FE. I think Trisha Helfer might be ESFJ preferences. But that supplier role, basically coordinating resources, not coordinating resources, getting the resources and doing all the orders. Like, you got to do a bit of stuff with sales and stuff like that, talking to people. So it's like a little bit more extroverted. You got to talk to a few more people. That's a little bit harder for ISTJ, but still doable, still understandable, because it's within that logistical intellect. And that logistical intellect, where half of it draws on TE and SI stuff, or rather, these intelligent actions, these jobs draw on TE and SI, and these jobs draw on FE and SI. Right, now these jobs draw on TI and SE and TI, but they're still ST functions. And as you can see, ISTJ is strong at all of these ST functions. But it's going to be pretty difficult. So, I mean, you can get like the ISTJ crafter, like the ISTJ approach to being like, say, a mechanic, or if they were a coder, but they would be very procedural, very by the book. I don't think they'd be very good as a promoter. Like, they'd be very like, there's not much charisma going on. I mean, they could like, they would do it by being very. They could be good at it only in that there's a lot of guardians out there and they know how to talk guardians, because like 50% of people are guardians. But being a promoter would be difficult for ISTJ. And it's like drawing on like the weakest of the club functions and TI. Yeah. But intellectually they understand it. It's like executing it, particularly that weak FE. So we've got here, there's another view of looking at it. Inspector's easier, then supervisor, then protector, then provider. Right. You can see these things here. Yeah, creative FE. Yeah, forming a company's processes. That example that was given to me by Kristen. I believe she's a creative ESTJ. So that's the thing. I believe that every function, I believe every extroverted function has a creative subfunction, and every introverted function has an imaginative subfunction. It's not just certain functions which are creative or imaginative. Every function has a creative stroke imaginative subfunction, depending on whether it's extroverted or introverted. So that would be, and I believe Kristen is a creative subtype of ESTJ. Now she's got parents which are utilitarian in that one's INTJ and one's ESFP, and they always sort of tend her to like think for herself, but her preference is to sort of do it by the book. So yeah, if you want to pause that to like take it in, my sort of subfunctions system. I've got to get a wriggle on, coming up to an hour already. And again, it's ticking valued and it's ticking a club function, but it's not a default function. Situational, but highly valued. So I mentioned the role enactment. So here's the question for you. Like, here's a little bit of a thing. So I'll ask you, you can think for yourselves here. Is ISTJ more easily able to enact these roles here, these expeditious roles, because they draw on other ST functions, SE and TI, or is ISTJ better able to enact these roles because they're part of the logistical intellect? But the problem here is it draws on a function that ISTJ is very bad at, FE. So, in my opinion, I think that ISTJ can enact this crafter role quite well. That you can get pretty good ISTJ people in PC repair and mechanics and coding, because it's like they're like the procedural version of like building stuff. Like you can like, it's like ISTJ and ISTP are sort of like mirror images of each other, but good at similar things. So Socionics is a name for these like quasi-identicals. So, like I said, you can get ISTJ mechanics. They'll be very safe, very by the book. ISTP mechanic will be more improvisational. But again, I don't think they could do a promoting role very well. Right, an ISTJ con man. Or con artist, rather. Naughty, naughty. All right. What else? So I think that's it for that. Now we're going to talk about SI. Right, okay, so someone helped me with this. She gave me an example of, yeah, I know a lot of intelligent women. Another woman who helped me out. She gave me the example of, because I asked her, like, I discussed this with her about how ISTJ uses TI, and she suggested that her brother, her ISTJ brother, this is different from Imogen, different ISTJ brother, and she said that he sort of like uses it to improve the system. So there you've got like an ISTJ resembler thinking for itself, but it still wants to go with the authorized system. Like it's looking towards the authority, but it wishes to improve the authority. They believe in the system. So it's like ISTJs, like whatever organization they're in, they believe in it and they want it to work better. And so it's like innovation within orthodoxy. So it would be, so you can see there how that their TI is sort of subservient to their SI, to their temperament, and their guardian temperament of working within orthodoxy, working within the system to improve the system. Whereas if you look at the NTPs, they're looking to come up with their own system. So they're using TI in a completely different way. So ISTJ to improve the orthodoxy, improve the procedures, not have a new procedure, but improve what already works. It's because it's that consistency, that SI consistency, going with what works because that's safest. And as soon as there's an ethos, the right tool for the right job in the right way. There was even a sign for that in India. I thought, wow, probably an ISTJ behind that. The right tool for the right job in the right way. Right. What else do we have? Right. Integration theories. Maybe they would do integration of various authorities, various experts on how to do something. Like, this is speculation because I'm not a coder. Like, there might be an ISTJ that like follows different principles from different authorized viewpoints and maybe try to integrate those. This again, I'm speculating. I'm using some imaginative TI. Also just TI in general. Yeah, maybe more assertive TI. The I'm right. The dependence on reason. That was just a message from Dario, name dropper. I'm a big typological name dropper. Right. Logic of uniform structure. Yeah. Like the subjectivity, and also the subjectivity of the guardian, the subjectivity of the contender guardian of ISTJ is going to come from, it's a different kind of subjectivity from, say, INTP, which is going to be abstract. So if we compare INTJ and ISTJ, so the INTJ's TI is going to be sort of like, oh yeah, something else ISTJs can do well with their TI. Spot mistakes in other people's language, especially their grammar or like spotting of errors. I imagine that ISTJ would be very good as a checker of somebody else's code. They would also probably be very good in defensive cybersecurity rather than offensive actions. It's pretty much everyone in like cyber warfare wants to do the offensive, whereas the defensive, like checking and inspecting and looking for holes and walls, like that ISTJ would be good in that role. This like attention to detail and having the discipline to stick to those details. I mean, remember carrying everything on in minutest detail that Vanderhoek mentioned? Right. But again, it's the fish that doesn't know its wet function. Because it's like, if you were to ask an ISTJ about this, it's like, that's not subjective. That's just the way you should do it. So it's like they wouldn't see their own subjectivity. No, that's the way you should do it. They'll even get the book out and show you. Say, you don't like that as well. And it's like the reduced affect display, the like that monotonal voice you can get a lot, especially with British ISTJs. I think a lot of those hardcore baseball fans in the United States are ISTJs. Like the real nerds are into the stats. That's another thing. Like ISTJs love statistics. It's concrete. Again, so it can be strong. And like I said, I think I got that information from a friend of mine, an INTJ female. Yeah. Now we're going on backseat driver. Now, there's going to be a bit of a difference. So, what I might say here is, usually with me, I put temperament first. So, there might be a bigger difference between SI and SE, like in terms of backseat driver or position. difference between, say, TI and TE in INTP. There are a load. Hang on a moment, I should be on this screen. There are a load of INTPs in science, and they're using TE. They're using TE. They're using empirical. They're going towards empirical, scientific method, all of that, going towards data. They're using TE. Or you got, even in the constructor role, all those designers and design bureau in Russia, like a lot of young ones. Well, I'm thinking these are NTPs. These are INTP. Drawing on, especially the one who is the head of the Su-57 at the moment, the felon. Some might say Putin's a felon. Anywho, he's ISTJ, Vladimir. Anyway, reduced affect display, and he's also counterphobic 6. Doesn't show a lot, and he has a little bit of weird any humor every now and then. A little bit of politics. Right. What am I supposed to go like? Donbass. Check it out. Right. 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 So, but see, the difference here is, so yes, in this model, backseat driver SE. Here's the problem, and this is where subfunctions can help. There's a massive difference in temperament between SI. You got Guardian SI, Artisan SE. So those parts of SE, you know, these bits that Dario had listed. Let's discuss how ISTJ might score in certain ones of these things. This bit here, instantly notice movement and impactful features in the environment. Okay, ISTJ is going to be pretty good at that. Freely follow your gut instincts and exciting physical impulses. No, it goes against the temperament of ISTJ, because ISTJ is more towards this. ISTJ would tick all these boxes. Literally. Instantly read visible cues to see how far you can go. ISTJ might read some visible cues, but not to see how far they go, but just because they're observant. Quickly move to take advantage of immediate options for action. No. ISTJ won't do that. That's tactical intelligence. Easy get in sync physically with people and things around you. No. Become totally absorbed as you move, touch, and see what's around. Now, they might do that. They might do that. They might be able to become totally absorbed. Not as much, but you can have, like, I think he might be an example of an ISTJ, like Alistair Cook, the batsman or batter, in cricketer. Ability to concentrate and mental strength. He also played the clarinet. That's something, yeah. ISTJ is probably good at classical music. I'm just going to put myself away again. Put myself in the box. So, again, spur action and get results simply by measuring your presence felt. Not as good as that. ESTJ is better at that. So, because again, the more conservative, especially if the Enneagram 6 fixated, they're not following their impulses freely. So, let's get back to role enactment. So, SE. Like I said, they can do this role, the crafter role, in... is that SI again? Let me go to SE. Apologies. SE. Right. So, let's go through some of these. So, uptime. They can do that. ISTJs can do that. Pay attention to what's outside of them. But it's going to have that subjective spin on it. In time, here and now. There's more of a past focus with the ISTJ. Again, stimulation, attention, immersion in present context. Situational awareness, I think that can be okay, because they are a concrete type. They are a sensory, instincting type. Force and SiTx, no man. Creative SE, no. It goes against the temperament. Adaptation to circumstances, that's going to be difficult. But the way a guardian might do it is, it might have a book. I had a book called Guardian Adaptation to Circumstances. I had a book on this, and it was called. Okay, let me. I can give you an example of this. So many ISTJs might be preppers, and it's like they're preparing. So in the United States, we're preparing for hyperinflation, hyperstagflation. And I think John Williams, who does shadow stats, might be ISTJ. He does go on. And so that adaptation to circumstances, it's like they can plan, again, with the prepper, preparing. And it's like, so they might adapt to circumstances in an SI way. So they might go, oh, it's gone wrong. This is what we do, because they've already thought about what can go wrong and what to do, because they're mentally prepared for it. But their adaptation is a trying to fit it towards an algorithm, a locker of solutions, rather than the artisan that's coming up with a solution on the fly based on the set of circumstances right in front of it. Whereas the ISTJ is going towards its mental locker to pick out a technique, to pick out an algorithm out of something that they've prepared for. And that's how the ISTJ would adapt to circumstances. And they might also have already prepared for those circumstances to avoid those nasty situations arising. So it is more, so one of the reasons why artisans adapt to circumstances more than guardians is they don't mind being in those situations where they have to adapt because they find it exciting, whereas the guardians plan so much, especially ISTJ, to avoid being in those situations where they have to adapt because they're focused on stability and they're going towards stable careers, stable options. So they don't put themselves in those situations where they have to adapt because that is stressful for the ISTJ. Right then, so temperament. And that is the gold in Keirsey, is the difference between artisans and guardians. It's 90% of people. And it will be varied a little bit by Enneagram, like counterphobic ISTJs. Vladimir Putin, who will be miscategorized as an ISTP because of Horny's sort of like macho accoutrements. But like that's specific to his upbringing. So, for example, part of his upbringing is that his mother took him to a secret church in the Soviet Union, probably Leningrad at the time. And so that is specific to his upbringing in how religious he is. But if that wasn't part of his upbringing, if both of his parents were atheist, that would have been what would be normal for Vladimir. So upbringing very much affects guardians. They are very much of their culture. Right. What else have we got? Adaptations. I think I've banged on about SE and about they're good at certain feats, like the ability to pay attention outside of themselves, but not the adaptation parts, because it's in opposition to the stabilizer, like the adaptation versus the stabilizer. You want to do something in the same old way. It's sort of like you want to stabilize rather than adapt. And again, going towards danger and audacity, they're looking for stability and security. Now we're in the counter club. So FI in ISTJ. My opinion is that FI in ISTJ is going to be affected by the temperament. It's going to be affected by the temperament. It's like you got to think. FI is subjective feeling. So how is the ISTJ's feeling subjective? They're not an NF. Now here is a quirky thing that can happen. When ISTJs get older, there's an ENFP inside the ISTJ. And maybe sometimes you'll get ISTJs who think they're funny, and then some of them out there might actually be funny. It's like, whoa, where did that come from? This is probably as they get older, and then we've got these valued counter club functions, NE and FI. Yeah, sorry for not labeling it, but you know, FI and FI. You know, you can, you know, slot 5, FI. You know, you can do it. But so it's like when I wrote a 13-page description, double typed, A4 sized for ESFJ, exploratory, and I was thinking about like FI in a Guardian, and I think their FI is very much going to be affected by their temperament. So what I mean by that is, you can have the ISTJ in an environment where, so it's FI when their feelings are different from the feelings around them and the standards around them, because that would be FE, that's external, sort of standards and morality. So when might the ISTJ be in opposition to that? Well, it would be the feelings will be based around FI. And so it might be ISTJ would have a feeling of, that's not responsible. Why aren't you following procedure? And so their FI feelings are coming from their Guardian temperament, their Guardian motivators. It's not like the FI in an NF. It's Guardian FI. And it meaning that the subjectivity of their feeling is coming from the subjectivity of their temperament, because temperament is subjective. It's from within. And so it's like Guardian FI will be ISTJ FI will be Guardian. It will have if people around them are irresponsible, if that's the norm around them, they'll still want them to be responsible. It's still going against the empirical there, because it's going from what they believe, what they feel, but from within, from their temperament. So that's the subjectivity of their feeling. And then their NE tends to be negative. If you want to just take that in, I don't know if they can do this. I don't know any ISTJ writers. I don't know about this. Maybe they might assert something that's subjective feeling that's coming from their temperament, where you'd have to sort of look at specific examples of like, how is that subjective? Again, so like you might have something from Vladimir Putin, where it's like, in fact, this might be a good example, because this is an example of people in the West not understanding where he's coming from, because his FI is different, because all of his upbringing and his focus on sort of like Russian history and a different set of values and facts and coming towards different conclusions. So again, you've got the Russian Orthodox Christian influence on him. Now, that you could possibly put under FE, because those are external values. So it gets a little bit tricky. Anyway, this isn't the Putin podcast. Anyway, it's just an ISTJ that's in the news. And oh yes, another thing that makes him ISTJ is such a bean counter, which is why that Russia is going to be able to sustain all of these sanctions, because Russia has a trade surplus. Russia has a sovereign wealth fund. So it's like their sovereign wealth fund is probably greater than their national debt. Now, what I do know Actually, it's not, but their foreign reserves are greater than their national debt, which means they can theoretically pay off all their national debt because it's so low. Fiscal responsibility. That's part of the Guardian temperament. But also, what did I say before about experiences and what you've lived through? Putin would have gone through, in fact, he did go through all those financial crises and monetary crises in the 1990s. So when you live through all that hyperinflation in the 1990s, that's going to get your mind right about monetary policy, and it's going to make you disciplined AF. So you've got this natural discipline of the ISTJ and his specific circumstances in the 90s. And that's why Russia is actually underspent on its defense, because he's put the fiscal discipline first, which is why lots of military projects were cancelled, because the funding wasn't there, because it was always about balancing the books. Again, particular circumstances. Whereas in the United States, a lot of guardians are sort of like, it's become the norm, although they know on a personal level all this debt's not very good, which was what the Tea Party was campaigning on in 2010. But, you know, the Tea Party seems to have died. All right. What have we got here? It's difficult to elaborate on FI. I did say that bit before about tertiary. I'll go back to it again. Here, if you want to sort of absorb it. About what I say about that slot 5. Slot 5. Dabbling tertiary. So they are going to want, it's difficult to speculate on how, yeah, I just think that the ISTJ's FI is going to be very much affected by their temperament and very much affected by their upbringing. Like, Vladimir Putin would be a very different person if he was born in a different country. I mean, imagine if he was born in, say, San Francisco. He'd have like San Francisco values. Might say the values of his parents. Yeah, part of it, I did remember him saying in an interview in the 90s where he said that he thought communism was a fairy tale. So that might be like a bit of the Guardian temperament. But a lot of the Guardians believed in socialism. Anyhow, so it's like Guardians are very much a product of their environment. Right. Orthodox. So which is why, I mean, Jeff opened my mind when he said to me that you can have a Guardian gang member or even the leader of a gang, because it's what's normal, what's orthodox. What have we got here? It's possible. You might even have like an ISTJ physicist, say they come from a family of physicists. Maybe got TI. But it might probably be a bit by the book though. There'll be that tendency there, or maybe, or improve the system, improve somebody else's system that they believe in. So not be revolutionary, evolutionary. There's the thing. I think the TI in ISTJ is evolutionary, not revolutionary. Whereas INTPs, I want to come up with their own system. Look at this. But again, this is like a pretty conservative system. This is pretty consistent with clubs and other things. I aim to be more sort of revolutionary in my writing, not this typology. Right. We shall see what we shall see. It's up to you to decide. Well, hopefully some episodes and videos something get posted this year. Now we're in 2022. Any stuff. Inferior any. They can get quirky, ISTJs. They can get quirky with that inferior NE, their inner ENFP. If you want to take that in. Yeah, they're not actively exploring possibilities, ISTJs. They are amused by a little bit of NE humor. So they're probably like someone like Ken Dodd. They like a little bit of NE, but not, just a little bit. No. They like mental imagery. absurd jokes, absurd humor with interesting mental imagery. Because again, it goes towards that SI imaginative subfunction. Maybe certain relations between ideas. Sort of the Jean Perret view of comedy. Jean Perret's view of comedy is very alpha quadra. In that, or basically, it's very sort of like SI and NE valuing, mental imagery and connections between ideas. It's called The New Comedy Writing by Jean Perret. Book that came out in the noughties. Again, it's still an inferior function. There might be some ISTJs that hardly ever use these functions, which is that idea of like the polarized type. So it's different from polar in socionics, which means place of least resistance. Polarized means there is a polarity, there is a counter nucleus in the mean field of conscious orientation. I call it the counter club. Oh yeah, so another thing to say about NE, it's one of these, it's only ticking one box, and it's a counter club, so NF functions, not ST, and it's a situational function. So in socionics, these would be one-dimensional functions. So it's furthest away from these big two, or rather these big two. So it's only got one thing going for it, and that's that it's valued. A lot of times not really seeking that many possibilities and stuff because they're naturally conservative with a small c. Right. Now, what you've got with the counterphobic 6, like Putin is, they've got the fear and they're conservative. And it's like, what are they going to do? In fact, I've got something I can show you. This might surprise you. I'm going to have to find it. There it is. Copy. It's just wanted to mention this. That's not right. I need to show that. There we go. Let's go back here. Paste. Go there. Is it? I need to show this. What am I on? I'm on NE. So this is ISTJ Putin. So this is debt levels. Now, how many of these count as proper countries? Well, Afghanistan, no one would lend to them. Okay, Estonia. That is a very TE valuing country, is Estonia. I know someone from Estonia. Miriam, who's playing Laura in the sitcom. Or rather, sci-fi-ish, dramatic-ish comedy. Solomon Islands, small. Botswana, Kuwait, oil-rich, then Russia. So these are the countries with the lowest debt to GDP. Lowest debt to GDP. Financial discipline. That's your ISTJ. But again, an ISTJ that lived through the hyperinflation of the 1990s when Russia wasn't financially and monetarily disciplined. And because there is this low amount of debt, they can afford 20% interest rates to defend their currency. So, but again, Kuwait, very oil-rich country, and again, Estonia, but Estonia's got trade deficits. Russia's got trade surpluses. But again, with all their natural resources. Right. Again, that's part of the discipline of ISTJ. Possibly the most disciplined of all the types, ISTJ. So self-disciplined. Probably the best at money. Being parsimonious with money. Pecunious. Is it pecunious? Maybe. I think impecunious is not having much money. Anyway, my P words fail me at the moment. NE did the NE. What are we doing now? NI counter club. Yeah, I messed this up in like doing these windows because I wanted to make sure that was under there. So again, this is stuff on NI. If you want to pause that and take it in. ISTJ is not good at this. And one of the reasons is like, if you look here, this is the opposite of SI stabilizing. Opposite of SI. Maybe a little bit with the improving the system, but no, they've got the caregiving romance style, not submissive. Yeah, they're going to be weak at that. It's so opposite to SI, which wants to stabilize, the contrarian alternative. But it might help them in seeing how things can go wrong. So it has that negative sort of like spin on it. Right. Anything else I can say about contrarian alternative? I will get a wriggle on. If you read this, yes, something there about guarding against the excesses of the lead function. Yeah. For certain narrow uses, the merits of this function can be seen by the type, even though it runs counter to the dominant function. So let's do a little bit of thinking for ISTJ. So ISTJ likes to stabilize the situation, likes to see how it's going to stay the same, but they can see how something can go wrong. Like I said, with the preppers. Again, those people are buying gold. ISTJs buy gold, defensive measure. You don't buy gold to earn money, you to maintain your purchasing power. It doesn't give a dividend. When you have real interest rates, you want your money in the bank because you're getting a positive rate of interest that's more than inflation. But inflation in real terms is way over 15. It's over 15% in real terms. So you ain't getting 15% in the stock market or 15% in. So as a defensive measure, you want to own gold. Naturally defensive ISTJ. Another thing, ISTJs, I've got a planner, but that's, in fact, when I get stuff done, it's when I go into ISTJ mode. I do a beneficiary shift at ISTJ. I have to force myself, though. And I get like super methodical. I don't think there's much else to say about now. I can get into FE though. Right. So I'm going to discuss how I'll sort of climax with this. Demonstrative dramatic emotions, ISTJ is bad at that. Again, that reduced affect display. They're not going to make good show players, which is the gender neutral term for actor or actress, and it is an English term, show player. Performing arts, they're not going to be good at performing arts. They could be good at music. Again, affect display is sort of, they got that reduced affect display. Now, you group harmony and focus on others. That is where ISTJ is going to be better than INTJ because they're a guardian. And the guardian yearns to belong. It's there. And it's not just a case of that applying to the SFJs. That's all guardians. And also, I'm going to show you something in terms of EEG. So, concerned, authority, belonging, security, gratitude. I'm going to show you something. We've got Vanderhoop on intuition. If you want to pause that. I've got to move myself out of the road. Right. Just various features of intuition. So going towards FE. So there's a bit that ISTJ is good at. So all guardians have high activity in a region that we would associate with FE. There, T5, attend to social feedback. That is high in all guardians. Even FE polar ISTJ. So if you think about it, ISTJ is not as FE polar as INTJ because of the guardian temperament. And there's an example, hashtag Keirsey temperament matters. Because the ISTJ wants to fit in, wants to belong. INTJ doesn't want to belong. They don't care. They only care about specific individuals, INTJs. They don't care about what Joe Smo thinks or Joe Public thinks. Whereas ISTJ does care about what people think as a group. They want to belong. They are orthodox. So you can say that ISTJ is more socially adjusted than INTJ. INTJ is more alienated than ISTJ. ISTJ is a guardian after all, and half the people are guardians. But where ISTJ is like INTJ, it's that reduced affect display. Hardly ever smile, or when the smile is there and it's briefly. Let's look at John Major. Again, with Vladimir Putin, it's like he doesn't show much emotion. And now the fear in his eyes is because of the counterphobic 6. He actually likes people giving him tough questions. Then he likes coming back and like answering that question. And what the pro-Putin people would say is something like Putin answering like a boss. Certain videos like that on YouTube. But it's like he actually likes being given these tough questions so that he can come back at them. It's the counterphobic thing. What else? So yeah, I mean, ISTJ is going to be more focused on others than INTJ. INTJ doesn't care. It's that utilitarian cooperative thing. Where ISTJ is cooperative, it wants to do it by the book. So it's not going to rub people the wrong way like INTJ. But there is that similarity in reduced affect display. So they're both weak with creative FE. And also, I would say demonstrative dramatic emotions. So better, as I say, ISTJ is better at group harmony and focus on others than INTJ. They still can be monotonal. When I hear them, and it's like I watch a lot of military videos, and like when I watch Jane's Defense and someone like Justin Bronk, I can just tell straight a flipping way when they're an ISTJ. Oh, we've got the latest information, and it's like this. It's so boring and factual and monotonal, and it's like, oh, I know you're an ISTJ. These are tells specific to the British culture, or rather English culture. I think that is pretty much it. Besides plus planes are different functions, yeah, like FE, like reduced affect display. So there's a component of FE that shows up in facial expressivity, and then all of these are all of the those all the well, you can see what they are. I don't need to tell you what they are. You can see what they are. I follow the rule of Richie Benaud when he was commentating on cricket from a leg spinner and leg spinner. Americans are thinking, what the hell? But he would say, don't say what the audience can see. Right. Not they can see. Right. I think I've been through that. So that is going to be the end of it. Bye-bye.